All right, we're ready for Proverbs 19 in our study this morning. And chapters 1 to 9, as we have mentioned each time, deal with the general principle of wisdom. Chapter 9 summarizes that section, personifies wisdom as this woman inviting us to a feast, and then there's her rival folly on the other side of the street, inviting us to her feast. Which feast will you partake of? That's the gist of chapters 1 to 9. From 10 on are general proverbs, various proverbs. Some sections are more contrast, others are just general kinds of proverbs. So let's get underway. We have a number of things to cover. We will not have time, obviously, looking at Proverbs 19 and 20 to deal with every single verse in detail. We're going to try to hit some of the high points and some things that may be most helpful to us. There are 14 categories as I have listed it. You may have, if you're making your own outline, less, you may have more. And there's nothing, no rigid rule concerning that. So we have in Proverbs 19 the following categories. We won't go through every one of these in our introduction, but there's the rich and the poor, there's honesty, there's the tongue, there is the fool versus the wise, etc., control of temper. Some of those we'll camp on more than others. Let's start with, obviously, the rich and the poor. Starting with verse 1. We're just going to list some concepts and get some practical things that we learn. Better is the poor who walks in his integrity than one who is perverse with his lips and is a fool. I learned from that that first of all, there's several things we might learn, but I'm learning that the poor can have God's approval. We're going to see later in this section of Proverbs, the poor are often despised, but the poor are not approved of God because they're poor, but rich or poor has nothing to do with whether God gives you his approval to you. So the verse 1 is the better is to be poor and have integrity. We'll come back to that verse a little later. Drop down to verse 22, something very similar. What is desired in a man is kindness, and a poor man is better than a liar. And that is people respect and God respects honesty more than whether one is rich or poor. I'm more interested in verse 4. What do you learn from verse 4? In fact, we have a question about this. Verse 4 says that wealth makes many friends, but the poor is separated from his friends. Let's get verse 6 with that because it makes similar points. Many entreat the favor of the nobility, but every man is a friend to one who gives gifts. Question number 1. How does wealth make friends? Say again. All right, draws them to them. Yeah, good point. The prodigal son, if you didn't catch what Ricky said, reminds him of the prodigal son who had many friends as long as he had money. When his money ran out, his friends ran out. That happens. You don't think you have any friends? If you have money, let people know that you've got money and you'll find friends coming out of the woodwork. They'll come from every corner of the earth. They'll suddenly show up. Absolutely. Good point. All right. That's verse 4, verse 6. Wealth makes many friends. Verse 4, verse 6. And every man is a friend of the one who gives gifts. People giving away things, they're going to have friends. Let's look at verse 7. Verse 4 and 7 both make the point. The poor are often despised. Now, we've made this point repeatedly through the Proverbs, that the writer of Proverbs is just observing, this is what I have observed in life. Just over the period of time, I've noticed and observed. Doesn't always mean things are right or wrong. It just means this is the way it is. And quite often, verse 4, the poor is separated from his friends, as the case of the prodigal son. The money runs out and his friends run out. But notice at verse 7, all the brothers of the poor hate him. How much more does the friends go far from him? He may pursue them, and yet they abandon him. What do you learn from that?
Don't be judgmental.
All right, don't be judgmental. What else do you learn? That's true. Say again.
Even your own family doesn't even want to do those that are poor. They'll drive them away. So how much harder it is for them to keep it from them.
I think, excellent point. And that ties with James 2. There comes in a rich man into the assembly and a poor man, and what is the setting in James 2? We rush to the rich man and say, you sit here, you have my seat. But the poor man, we say, you sit off over there, we don't really care. Why are the poor disdained? I'm fishing for one reason. There may be a number of them, but I'm fishing for a reason. We seek the rich. Let's make a contrast. Let's do it that way. We go after the rich man because, say again, what they can do for me. I don't go after the poor man because he may expect something from me. Yeah, I may disdain the poor because he may be asking for money from me. He may demand some help from me. So I'd rather kind of push him to the side because I really don't want to help the poor, but I would like for the rich to help and benefit me. That may be the point of verse 7. All right, verse 14. Let's get that one and then we'll leave that section. Verse 14. I want verse 14. Houses and riches are the inheritance of the fathers, but a prudent wife is from the Lord. What do you learn about riches and money, poor, and the rich from verse 14? Or do you learn anything? I want you to think of we'll see this more when we get down to the family. But the verses 13 and 14 are in seemingly contrast to each other. But even in verse 14, there seems to be a contrast. Houses and riches are inheritance of the father. In other words, a father may leave houses and riches, but a prudent wife is a blessing from the Lord. So if you inherited a mansion and acres and acres in money from your father, you think, man, I'm rich because you received something from your father. But if you have a prudent wife, if you have a wise wife, that's worth more than any riches. Does that make sense? That's why I put that verse in that category. It's worth more than any riches and inheritance that you may receive. More about her in just a moment. All right, let's go to honesty, verse 1. Basically summarize verse 1 that one who's perverse in his lips is a fool. Better is a poor who is walks in his integrity. God expects us to be people of integrity. What does verse 22 tell us about honesty?
The NLT says loyalty makes a person attractive.
All right, yeah, loyalty makes a person attractive. What else do you learn from verse 22? Helps me if I'm in the right text here. What is desired in a man is kindness, but a poor man is better than a liar. Again, it's better to be poor and to be honest than to be rich and be a liar. No one has any respect for a liar at all. We'll say more about that perhaps in a moment. Let's go to the tongue. Let's talk about the tongue. There's several things we learn from the tongue. Look at verse 1 again. We've talked about verse 1 repeatedly. Verse 1, I'm learning from that it's you're a fool to abuse the tongue. Let's drop down to verse 28. What do you learn from verse 28 along that same line? I'm learning again that to abuse the tongue, there's reputable witness. In other words, one who lies, scorns justice. And so you're a fool to abuse your tongue in that fashion. Let's go to verse 5 and verse 9. Let's put those two together. And there's a simple point we learned. What do you learn from verse 5? All right. Good point. What do you learn from verse 5? All right. Can't be trusted. In other words, I'm learning that the liar will be punished. He'll He'll not escape punishment. Learn that from verse 9 as well. Let's go to verse 13b. The contentions of our wife are a continual dripping. By the way, 21:9, 21:19, and 25:24. I'll give those again if you're wanting to put those as marginal references that talk about the same principle. 21 verse 9, 21 verse 19, and then 25 and 24, 25 and verse 24. What does that suggest to you? Footnote will say concerning drippings, irritation, yeah. Yeah, the tongue's not in control, so it... Yeah, it's like dripping water, just a continual dripping that after a while it just gets irritating. We can irritate others. Constant contentions and complaining irritates others. I'm interested at verse 22. Now, what is desired of a man is kindness, but a poor man is better than a liar. What do you learn from verse 22? Okay. Yeah, I think he's talking about loyalty, which relates to this principle of lying. I think, and I want to come back to verse 22 and another section in a moment, but what is desired in a man is kindness, and a poor man is better than a liar. In other words, he keeps his promises. Some translations, it's what I was looking for, that he doesn't keep his promise, and I'm not finding the one I saw this morning. But in essence, we have more respect for a poor man than we do a man who makes promises and then doesn't fulfill that. And so you see that in every kind of business. You see it among brethren. I see it in the building industry a great deal, where people, I'm going to do, here's what I'm going to, and they don't ever do what they say. They'll never show up when they say. No one appreciates a person who makes promises who never fulfills that. Make sense? All right. Let's move from that and talk about the fool versus the wise. We're not going to talk about all of these verses, but let's look at verse 2. Now, verse 2 is quite interesting to me. It is not good for a soul to be without knowledge, and he who hastens sins, who hastens with his feet. What's that about? If we don't get another proverb, this one is very helpful to us. This is very practical. Absolutely. If you don't think before you act, there's a high opportunity you're going to be doing wrong. The New Century Version, which is a little freer kind of translation, but it usually gets the concept. That's why you hear me quote it frequently. Says, enthusiasm without knowledge is not good. If you act too quickly, you might make a mistake. That's a general principle of life. To be excited without some knowledge, zeal without knowledge. But you may be purchasing something. You get ready to buy something and you're all excited without getting some information. You're more apt to make a mistake and buy the wrong thing or spend or waste your money. Jumping into marriage, you're all excited about getting married without some knowledge. You're more apt to make a mistake, marry the wrong person. That's a general principle. Let me read that again. Enthusiasm without knowledge is not good. If you act too quickly, you might make a mistake. You're more apt to sin, do wrong. Does that make sense? They miss the way. Hasty feet. Show me somebody that's always proud of the fact that they can make quick decisions. They don't take much time to make any decision. Do it boom, 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 boom. And I'll show you somebody that's making a lot of mistakes in their life. I guarantee it. You say, how do you know? That's what the proverb just told me. That's how I know that. Let's go to verse 3. The foolishness of a man twists his way, and his heart frets against the Lord. What is verse 3 saying? We're contrasting the fool versus the wise. Say again? His way is difficult. The New Century again says, the people's own foolishness ruined their lives, but in their minds they blame the Lord. How often do you see that where people, they go in their own direction, living their own life, doing it their own way, and their lives come to ruin, and yet they complain against God? As if God did that to them. They did it to themselves. That's the fool. All right, let's move further. We've already looked at look at verse 20. We're not going to look at every verse that's on the screen. Not going to do that. Look at verse 20. Listen to the counsel and receive instruction that you may be wise in your latter days. What's it saying? Pay attention. Humility, humble yourself. Anything else? Yeah, it pays off in the long run. Listen to the counsel while you're young. Let's go to the next category. Let's talk about control of temper. We're going to list several things here. Look at verse 11. In fact, we have a question about that on verse 11. Let's get the verse. The discretion of a man makes him slow to anger, and it's to his glory to overlook transgression. Question number 2, how do you learn to be slow to anger? The text doesn't actually tell you. That was more of a thought-provoking question. What do you learn? Verse 11. Control your temper. What else? Think before you act. Think before you speak. How can you learn to be slow to anger? Suppose you say, I've been fast to anger. I'm quick-tempered, and I want to do what this proverb says. How am I going to learn that? Good point.
Sometimes think about what's important to do with the risk of losing the temper, ultimately maybe losing the soul.
All right.
Something that's in the grand scheme of good thing.
Yeah, maybe I got upset about something really not all that important.
Chapter 15 and verse 18, Donnie, the hot-tempered man stirs at strife, but the slow to anger calms the dispute.
Yeah. What I'm learning from that is the example of other people. When I see somebody's quick-tempered, how much trouble they get into, and then I see people that are calm and how they deal with things, that helps me learn that principle a great deal. Let's go back to verse 11. The discretion of a man makes him slow to anger. That is, the English Standard uses the expression common sense or good sense. People with good sense, in other words, people with wisdom. The New Century says the wise are patient. People of wisdom are people who are patient, and it's to his glory to overlook a transgression. The NLT says sensible people control their temper. What does it mean to overlook a transgression? Does it mean that you just ignore sin? It's wise to ignore sin? Contradicts other passages. What does that suggest to you? All right, forgiveness. He's willing to overlook wrongs done to him. In other words, are you ever going to be done wrong? Sure. Is there times you just need to overlook something, maybe inadvertently you were done wrong? That it's wise not to count and focus on everything that's ever been said or done wrong against you. The wise are patient people. Talking about control of temper, let's look at verse 13b. The footnote is interesting. As we've already mentioned, the irritation, the contentions of a wife. If we don't control our temper, we can be irritating to others. Verse 19, this was quite interesting. What do you learn from verse 19? Learn a couple of things. A man of great wrath, in other words, he doesn't control his temper, will suffer punishment. If you deliver him, you'll have to do it again.
Jumps into it without thinking, then he gets in trouble by it.
All right. What else? That's good.
You need to let him suffer his punishment in the long run.
Yeah. Because if I bail him out, he's going to do it again. So sometimes you just let people sweat it out. Just let them suffer from their hot temper and let them suffer the punishment instead of bailing them out all the time, because they are just prone to do that over and over again. Let's move on to, let's jump to family. It's not that verse 12 is unimportant, but let's talk about family. Let's learn some things about family from this context, and let's see what we see. Let's start with verse 13 concerning family. The foolish son is a ruin to his father. The contentions of wife are continual dripping. What do you learn from that?
I think the father needs to let the son suffer his punishment instead of the previous scripture. He's going to be a foolish son, give him the wrath, let him go. Let him fall.
All right. That's good. What else?
A lot of people put, child fails, you fail.
Yes. Good point. The parent's not always to blame, but often they go hand in hand. They're tied together. And you suffer, it brings the ruin of the father. How many people have you known, just generally speaking, how many men have you known should have been elders in the church, but they can't be and will never be because, finish my sentence, because of their children. And so they bring the ruin of their father. Let's get verse 18 now. Chasing the son, and your translation may read different, and there's a reason for that. The King James reads a little different. I think it's American Standard as well as from others. The MEV reads different. But chasing your son while there's hope. I'm reading from the New King James. Let's start over. Chasing your son while there is hope, and do not set your heart on his destruction. The King James says, do not spare for his crying. And so does the MEV. All right. Let's talk about what we learned from that. You've heard me say multiple times that when my children were small, there is no book that had more impact on me as a father raising my children than just reading Proverbs. And reading Proverbs and reading Proverbs. And if you are raising children, you need to read Proverbs. If you are advising people who are raising children, you need to read Proverbs and read Proverbs and read Proverbs. Nothing will help you more. This verse helps a lot. What's it saying? We learned 2 or 3 things.
Discipline promptly.
Yeah. You discipline them promptly. You discipline them while they're young, while there's hope, while you can still mold and shape. In other words, you don't let the child grow up, and then as they get older and mature, and I can reason with them, now I'm going to try to talk to them about their strong will, and I'm going to talk to them about the Lord. It's too late. It's too late. It's over. Absolutely. So chasing the son while there's hope, while you can still mold and shape the child.
Maybe this is strange, but kind of almost telling you that no matter their age, as a parent, you're responsible for caution them, advise them, teach them, instruct them.
Absolutely. You keep doing that. You've heard me say many times that James Dobson says a child's entire personality is developed by the age of 5. So you've got a short window to get that personality. And do you stop at 5? No. You're still training and working with that child, but you get that child under control by the age of 5. Because if you don't, you're probably in trouble. So chasing the son while there is hope, and do not set your heart on his destruction. The King James says, do not spare for the crying. King, yeah, you hear me quote from King. That's Dan King, who's coming in June. Dan King is a Hebrew scholar. I don't mean he's just he's a Hebrew scholar. And Dan takes the King James rendering as perhaps the superior rendering of that. I'll leave that to you to argue with him if you think otherwise. But Dan favors that. Not that the New King James is inferior, but he thinks there's a connection with those, and so do others. And so here's the point. What does it mean? Let's take the King James rendering. Do not, and let not your soul spare for his crying. Chasing the son while there's hope, don't spare for the crying.
Don't let the crying keep you from discipline.
Yeah. You discipline or you spank the child, and what's most likely going to happen? They're going to cry. I don't want them to cry, so then I back away. So it may be because they are crying or because you think they will cry. Then don't spare for that because they need the discipline and they need the shaping and the molding. Make sense? Don't spare for the crying. All right? Well, how does that relate to the do not set your heart on his destruction? The NEC or NCV, the New Century Version, correct your children while there is still hope. Do not let them destroy themselves. Now, that's the essence of that phrase, I think. In other words, I think the text is saying an undisciplined child is set toward destruction. Discipline the child while there's hope. Don't let the crying keep you from dealing with the child, because if you don't deal with the child, they're set toward destruction. But if you do deal with the child and you discipline the child, you're going to save them in eternity. Does that make sense? Discipline the child in view of eternity, not concerning the unpleasantness at the moment. Make sense?
You discipline the child. You let them know you love them. And you're doing it because it's the right thing to do. Not only that, because the Lord tells you to do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's go to laziness. Let's look at verse 24. Verse 15, we'll forego. Verse 24, a slothful man bears his hand in the bowl and will not so much as bring his hand bring it to his mouth. What is that saying? By the way, 26:15 says something very similar. Yeah. Some are just too lazy. A slothful man, as he's in his condition because he's lazy. And it's like a man, it's an overstatement for emphasis that he's so lazy. He puts his hand down in the food bowl, but he's too lazy to even bring it up and put it in his mouth. Multiple times, when I lived in Alabama, we had a number of farmers there that had like 1 and 2 acre gardens that they just put out and just let it grow, and then just tell people in the community, you come and get anything you want. There's all kinds of food over there. Just go over and pick all you want. We'd have beggars stop by the building and say, I'm hungry, I need food. And multiple guys in the church say, well, my garden's right over here 2 streets over, mine's over here, this 3 streets over, just go get anything you want. And they would always ask, you can guess what the question was, are you going to pick it for me? The hand was in the bowl, too lazy to pick it up, bring it to the mouth. If you're not going to pick it for me, I don't want it. They didn't really want it. They weren't hungry. They ain't got real hungry. Let's go to the fear of God. I'm going to skip down to the fear of God. Verse 23. What do you learn from verse 23? It says, the fear of the Lord leads to life, and he who has it will abide in satisfaction, and he will not be visited with evil. Let's go to question 4. How does the fear of the Lord lead to life? Bring security. You'll do the commandments. We saw in Proverbs 16, the fear of the Lord is to cease evil, stop evil, so it means we will quit sin. Right, if you fear God, you're not afraid of death. And so we live life rather than living in fear of death. We fear God instead of fearing death. All right, let's go, let's see, what else do I want to deal with? Verse 25, let's go down here to accepting reproof, and then we're going to move to Proverbs 20. Strike a scoffer, and the simple will become weary. Reprove one who has understanding, and he'll discern knowledge. What's that about? I think there's perhaps 3 categories of people that are dealt with here. Here's the scoffer, the rebel, the rebellious. You strike the scoffer, whether that's verbally rebuke them or you even beat the scoffer. Doesn't matter as far as the point. So the scoffer's dealt with. The scoffer probably is not going to benefit from that at all. But somebody else will. And that is the simple. That's the naive. They may look at that and realize They're lacking in judgment, they're lacking in wisdom, but they're going to see the scoffer was struck. Therefore, I don't want to be like the scoffer. Does that make sense? All right, he got in trouble. He's foolish, and his foolish behavior led to this being beaten or rebuked severely. I don't want that. But there's a third category of person. Reprove one who has understanding, and he will discern knowledge. Someone who has some wisdom, and you point out to them what you're doing is not in harmony with the standard that you're going by, he's going to want to quickly correct. He welcomes that. Does that make sense? So here's one who refuses it. Here's one who accepts it. And then here's one who may learn from it even though they're not looking for the wisdom. Perhaps three categories of people. Anything else on Proverbs 19? Say again? Yeah, you learn from your mistakes. Absolutely. All right. Let's go to Proverbs 20 now. And you think, well, that doesn't look so bad, but there are actually 20 categories here, less verses in each one of the categories. So let's work through this and see what we have. Start with verse 1. Let's talk about wine. What do you learn from verse 1 about wine? Question number 6. What does wine is a mocker? What does that mean? Wine is a mocker, strong drink. All right. Yeah. Anything else? That's good. Good. The effects it has, damage it does. It makes you look foolish. It doesn't make you look wise. It's misleading. It's deceptive. I think that's the idea of it being a mocker. Quite often, the advertisements for drinking is, have you ever seen an advertisement for beer or wine or any kind of drink that shows the gutter drunk? Never seen that. It's always someone in a pleasant setting, enjoying a social drink, and it seems like this life is so pleasant for them. You never see the alcoholic who is addicted. You don't see that. And so wine is deceptive. It makes promises that it can't. It promises to take your problems away. And so I'm going through problems, going through trial, going through heartache, and if I drink, and then when you finally get sober, what about your problems? And added more. Added more. Absolutely. So indeed, it's mocking. Yes.
One of the biggest deceptions I've seen on these advertisements for alcohol is drink responsibly.
Yeah. That's like commit fornication responsibly. Yeah. Good luck with that. Let's jump down to strife, number 3. This one is quite interesting. It is honorable for a man to stop striving, since any fool can start a quarrel. What's that about? Yeah. Avoiding a fight is honorable. Don't get involved. It takes some wisdom to avoid a conflict. Any fool can start a fight. It doesn't take much. It doesn't take much sense at all to start an argument. There's some people who love an argument. They love a quarrel. They love a conflict. It doesn't take any wisdom to start a conflict. It takes some wisdom to avoid conflict and resolve differences. Make sense? All right. Let's go to, again, the lazy just quickly. Verse 4. The sluggard will not plow because of winter. Then he'll beg in the harvest, have nothing. What's that mean? Yeah, I think it focuses on he doesn't plow in the winter. It's too cold, too damp. In other words, he's not going to make preparation later. So he's got all kinds of excuses. We saw that in previous. Let's go to verse 5, point number 5, seeking wisdom and advice. Let's go to verse 5. Counsel in the heart of a man is like deep water, but a man of understanding will draw it out. What do you learn from verse 5? All right, good point. Good point.
I think we should look around and find watch for those wise men, and go to those wise men for counsel, and try to draw it out of them. So they may not offer it out of humility, but they may have
Good point. Wisdom is not something that's just going to be flowing in your direction where you just sit back and say, I want good advice, and it's just going to come flowing. Sometimes you got to go look for it, and you may have to mine it and dig it out. You may have to find the source and dig it out. You may have to go talk to someone and ask and pull that out. And so the counsel in the heart of a man is like deep water. Man of understanding will draw it out. He'll find the sources, and this is a source of wisdom. I'm going to pull it out. Verse 18, along the same line, every purpose is established by counsel, and by wise counsel wage war. In other words, seek wisdom. If something is important as going to war, if you were the president and you have the power to put the troops out into war, and you're going to do that, would it be wise to seek advice from people who know something about that? Yeah. And it'd be foolish to say, I think I'm going to declare war. Can't do that. Use some wisdom. Well, you say, I'm not ever going to declare war. I got that. But before you declare war on somebody or declare war on something or somebody's action, get some judgment and some advice. Before you take action in any field, use some judgment and some advice. Let's move on. Let's talk about verse 6. Point number 6, arrogance and self-righteousness. Now, what's interesting is verse 6. Could be put in the category of arrogance. Most men proclaim their own goodness, but who can find a faithful man? What else could that verse be saying? It may deal and does deal somewhat with arrogance. Again, quote from the New Century. Many people claim to be loyal, but it's hard to find a trustworthy person. Would you agree with that principle? I'm not asking if you agree with the translation of that. Do you agree with that principle? That many people claim to be loyal, but it's hard to find a trustworthy person. They may be self-righteous. It's true. What do you mean people claim to be loyal? Yeah. I will. Here's what you can trust with me. I'm claiming to be loyal to you. There's a whole world of people saying, I will do this for you. I will. But one that can be trusted, that you know they will, hard to find. I know I deal with the building industry a lot. And I want to tell you, when a builder says, I'll be there Monday, don't believe him. Don't believe him. Don't believe him. He ain't going to show up. I'll guarantee you. And he's not, I'll call you if I'm not coming. He ain't going to do it. He's just not going to do it. That just doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. You can't trust any of them. And so that's just the way it works. So loyalty is promised. But where can you find somebody you can put your trust in? They're hard to find. They are out there, but it's hard to find. All right. Verse 9 relates similar to that. Verse 9, who can say I have a clean heart and am pure from sin? I think I'll put that in the category of self-righteousness, the one who claims I haven't done anything wrong. Now let's talk about integrity. Let's see if we can deal with that. And I want to deal with another category or two here. In verse 7, is that the verse I want? The righteous man walks in his integrity, and his children blessed. Yeah. What do you learn from verse 7? Yeah, a person who walks in his children walk in the footsteps, obviously, but a man who has integrity and is honest, his children are going to be blessed after him. Verse 10, closely, diverse weights. Verse 10 and verse 23, diverse weights are an abomination to the Lord. What's that about? It's dishonesty. In other words, again, the principle of doesn't only apply to this, but selling something by the pound and you adjust the scale to your favor, that's dishonest. Older people don't understand what I'm talking about when they used to sell potatoes by the bag. They'd stovepipe the potatoes. Remember that? Am I the only one old enough to know what stovepiping potatoes mean? You put all the little, they put a stovepipe in a bag, and then they put the little ones inside, and then put the big ones on the outside, and then pull the stovepipe out, and it looks like you're getting a bag full of big potatoes, and you got these little knots. And so that's dishonesty. leaving the illusion you're getting something you're not. Let's drop down to 14. I want to talk about bargaining practices. And also in the category of dishonesty. It is good for nothing, cries the buyer, but when he's gone his way, then he boasts. This one's interesting. I call it bargaining practice. I also put verse 14 under deceitfulness and integrity. It is good for nothing, cries the buyer. It is. Suppose, I'll illustrate this since Stephen sells tractors. I go over to Stephen and look at this tractor, and I say, that thing is worthless. That thing is, it's about half shot. And you're asking $20,000 for it, I'll give you 10. And I beat him down to the point that I finally get it for 10. And then I'll run off over here and tell Ricky, I got a deal. This thing's worth $20,000. And bragging about it. Is that honest? No. It's not talking about the practice of dealing and trying to get a price down, but it's where you recognize there is value in this, but I act like it's worthless. So he said it's worthless. It's worth nothing, says the buyer. And then he goes away and brags that I got a deal. I got a real steal. I took advantage of him. I got it way down. Does that make sense? Be careful of your bargaining practices. All right, we don't have time to deal with all of the rest of these, but verse 16 I want to hit. We've talked about loaning to a stranger and being a surety, but what does it suggest and hold a pledge if it's for a seductress? Let's get that one and we'll probably be done. Here's the bottom line. Be wary of people, of dealing with people who have no or who lack judgment. Protect yourself. And so if, let's say you were loaning money to a seductress, she doesn't have judgment to start with. I don't think it's saying that you're probably going to be dealing with seductress, but if you were loaning money to a prostitute, you better be wary because she's already shown lack of judgment. You're probably going to lose the money you got. Does that make sense? Be wary of people of dealing with people, making business deals with people, loaning money to people, getting in commitments with people who lack judgment. I think that's the point of verse, what verse was that? Verse 16. We'll stop at that.